and welcome to the Sales Code Leadership Podcast with Kevin Thiele, the host of the podcast and the founder of Sales Code. And this week, I'm delighted to introduce Drew Muir. Drew, how are you today?
I am well, Kevin. Thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely welcome. Where are you calling in from? Whereabouts in the world are you?
I'm in Santa Barbara, California, so just north of Los Angeles for those who are not in the United States. That's our nearest reference point.
A lovely place, I'm sure. Is it sunny today?
It will be soon. We've had some overcast, what we call May gray weather here, which has now turned into, we're recording this in early June, so it's become June gloom. The sun will break through soon, but we've had a bit of fog and mist to start the summer.
You used to have smog there, didn't you?
We did, yeah. We had there's a run of wildfires across California that just seems to get worse and worse. So when we have a period without that, even if it's a little overcast, we'll take it.
Yeah. You're working from home or from the office?
From home, yes. And I'm sure we'll get into this, but Radical Candor, we don't even have an office. We are all over the map and over the world. So home is office, office is home. They're one and the same.
Yeah. I love America, by the way. I do. Excellent. I love them. I went to America for the first time. I was already like over 30, might have been 35. I had a great job as the corporate sales director at Symantec years and years ago.
Oh, yeah.
And so I was flown out for new hire training to America. And of course, all I'd ever seen, I grew up as a kid in the 70s watching American TV shows like the Rockford Files and all these Western programs. I loved American, all that stuff, right? It just seemed so glamorous to me. Particularly England in the 70s was a bit depressing. And I got off the plane at San Francisco Airport, got in the cab, got to the hotel, good hotel they put us in. And this was on a Friday. Actually, it might even have been a Thursday. And the conference I was attending for the new hire training didn't start till the Monday. So I thought, well, I could knock around San Francisco today. And that's what I did on the Saturday. I thought on Sunday, I'll hire a car and drive to Los Angeles. I thought I'll go and have a look at the Beverly Hills and everything. So I hired this car down the highway. Is it the 101?
That's right. Right.
Got on the 101. The first sign I saw, motorway sign, I think said 375 miles.
Yes.
So I got to the next turning about 10 miles around, turned around and came back. Because it's such a big place. I mean, California is the same size as the whole of the UK.
It's a big state. Big state. Yeah. And I actually, before moving down here to Santa Barbara, I lived in San Francisco. And so my wife and I, when we were looking at houses, would make that round trip that you're describing, and it is quite a trip.
Yeah, it is. It's quite a trip. Well, we were conducting ourselves courtesy of Zoom Incorporated today, which was a great way of connecting with people. What is it you get paid to do now, then, Drew? Let's hear it.
Yeah, so I'm the director of client partnerships at Radical Candor, and our mission is to rid the world of bad bosses, so to speak. So my job in that is to connect the companies that we work with across the United States and really across the world, large, small, and otherwise, with the programs that we offer, whether those are workshops, talks, e-courses, scalable solutions, really ways to help people improve the skills of giving and receiving feedback and of collaborative communication in general. So that's what we do, and that's what I have the pleasure of doing.
We're going to talk more about that. That's the special topic for this podcast, Radical Candor in Sales and Leadership. That's what I want to get into in a couple of minutes. But before we get there, I need to know, is this the career you had in mind at 16, Drew?
Oh, it's so funny you ask, because the last thing that I wanted to do when I was 16 was be in sales at all. I think back in those days, and I'm sure you remember well, there was a probably well-earned reputation of salespeople being pushy and aggressive, and you're purely measured on metrics like how many calls you're making or how many doors you're knocking on. And that to me didn't sound fun at all. And so I actually wanted to avoid being in sales as much as possible as I went through university and into my first job out of university. And it was actually up until working at a company called CEB, which we'll come to talk about a little bit more later, where I worked with a previous podcast guest of yours, Matt Dixon, who wrote The Challenger Sale. And I had the pleasure of combing through a lot of the data that founded the Challenger research, which ultimately said people and customers want to listen to salespeople when they have something interesting to say. And that really changed my entire mindset where, truly the world is open to salespeople if you're going to act as a strategic advisor and not as a pushy person who wants to, meet your quota and doesn't care about anything else. And so that was a bit of the turning point for me that got me back into the world of actually selling. Because I had been in entry level sales jobs, and it really was a pound the pavement, make dials, call people, and that was about it. And then the new world of selling, where you were expected to bring something interesting to your clients, that was something that was interesting to me. Getting paid for your thinking and for your brain, as opposed to pure energy and dials.
Well, I'm a massive fan of the Challenger sale. And many people in the tech sector, I was groundbreaking book. For me, it was the second book that made a massive impact on me from a sales perspective. And the first one was a long time before that, the Spin Selling book from Huthwaite by Professor Neil Rackham. That's right. Fantastic book. And I know that there's quite a bit of correlation between those two. This isn't our specialist topic today, because you no longer work there and you're not speaking on behalf of CEB, but I'm kind of fascinated about your perspective on it for a few minutes. When you arrived at CEB, you weren't a salesperson.
Correct. Yeah, I was actually delivering the client engagements which we became, Challenger became its own business eventually, but delivering Challenger selling training engagements to companies all over the world. And so I was more in a client delivery and consultant role, and then started to realize through the work that we were doing, there's a lot of value in the world of selling to be had, and you get paid handsomely to do it. So why not get back into that world? So Challenger, the research, the book, and the work that we got to do were all, like you said, pretty groundbreaking and quite data backed. And I know from your discussion with Matt Dixon that on a previous episode, that was one of the things that Neil Rackham, who you mentioned, wrote Spin Selling and wrote the foreword to the Challenger sale. I think there was an anecdote that you had in your conversation with Matt that in writing the foreword for the Challenger sale, he revealed that he gets asked to write many forewords or recommendations for books and just throws them away if they're not backed by data and research. And Challenger was one of those that actually did. And so being a analytical mind myself, that was what really drew me to it in the first place. And then I thought, hang on, this is something that the marketplace wants and needs, is salespeople who are bringing something interesting that they want to hear and frankly need to hear for the success of their business. And that really got me back into the world of being a salesperson myself.
So you were in sales before Challenger, before the CEB for a while. And at CEB, you were essentially a sales trainer and facilitator a lot of the time, training professional salespeople, presumably very highly paid. A lot of them in the tech sector, I'm assuming, were they? Yeah, because
yes.
Still very popular, obviously. And this is like 10 years ago when it came out, wasn't it? Was it something like that?
Yeah, 10, 11 years ago. Yeah.
How did that feel as someone who hadn't been a professional salesperson in the tech sector, delivering classroom? Was it big classrooms? I mean, we're talking hundreds of people or what?
Yeah, we would do some that were, as part of big sales conferences where there were hundreds or thousands of people at a time. And a lot of the work really was in a little bit more intimate workshop focused programs where we were getting into accounts that people would bring in that were stuck, and how do we use the Challenger methodology to unstick those deals? Right. What's an insight that we can bring that will move that forward? And so that was a really rewarding part to me, was you got to see these big deals at companies, like you mentioned, a lot of them were tech companies where, there's an account that has untapped millions of dollars of potential to it. They're bringing it to us and saying, I'm stuck, I'm not sure what to do. Let's apply this methodology. And then a couple months down the road, let's revisit the progress of that account. And quite often it was the result of Challenger that led to that unlocking, $1 million or more of revenue for that company. So it was really cool to see the impact that could have. And to your point, being a relatively early career professional who didn't have a lot of sales experience myself, it was really, coming back to, we know this works because it's based in data and research, and, the methodology speaks for itself. So that gave me the confidence to do it. But then the experience of doing that really gave me the confidence to get back into being in sales myself.
There seems to be, without being too cheesy, quite a strong link between challenger sales and radical candor. Because one of the things about challenger sales is you're encouraged to be quite direct and sometimes a bit confrontational, to have an opinion, actually not be afraid to state it quite boldly. So do you think they're compatible or conflicting styles, would you say, or how would you, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it really is pretty fascinating. I guess if you think about the different stereotypes that each of these models is breaking, the challenger sale sought to break that stereotype of the pushy salesperson who didn't actually have anything interesting to say, just wanted to bring their products and tout features and benefits, break that mold by bringing something that's specific to the client's business that they want to listen to. Radical Candor, in a parallel way, is seeking to break the command and control management environment that has persisted for a long time and give people the tools that are needed to be kind and clear in their messaging and in their feedback, and also being specific and sincere in how they deliver it. And so there's a real balance that you can strike by being able to care personally about the person that you're working with, but also be able to challenge them directly. And to your point, therein is the link to the challenger sale, being willing to be direct with a person, even if it's something that might be uncomfortable for them to hear. And in challenger selling, that might be, from the client's perspective, you're telling them why they're losing so much money by sticking with the status quo. Through using radical candor and direct feedback, you might be uncovering for a person a behavior or a skill that they're lacking, or something that they're saying or doing in sales calls or meetings that is costing them business. And so being able to confront them with that in a way that shows that you care about their development as a person and as a sales professional, it really is enlightening to them when it's done well.
So what's the history behind Radical Candor? Can you give us a bit of bio from that point of view?
Of course. Yeah. So it started with a book that was written by Kim Scott, titled the same, Radical Candor. It came out about 7 years ago. And so Kim, wonderful author and speaker, now has authored at least 3 books that I know about. And she is the co-founder of our company, Radical Candor LLC. And so there's several of us who build curricula, deliver, and sell what we do. And the book was really written by Kim originally as sort of a how-to guide for managers and leaders, how to help people enjoy the work that they're doing while doing better work as well. And through that, be better deliverers and receivers of feedback. Right. And then across the course of the last 6 or 7 years, as we've been delivering this work, we started to realize that this is not just applicable to managers and leaders, but people at all levels, whether entry-level, mid-career, senior leadership, because feedback and difficult conversations, they're happening roughly in equal measure when done well, upwards, downwards, and sideways. And so we've made a point of bringing this in as scalable a way as possible to people at all levels of all organizations, so they can advance and do better work and enjoy that work.
How would I use it as a leader? What would be an example of a context where it might be appropriate?
Yeah. So one thing that we often say, particularly for sales leaders, which I'm sure your listenership will, there's probably lots of them included in that. One thing that we like to say is it's not feedback if you can say the same thing to a dog. And so if you think about...
Hold on. I love that. It's not feedback if you can say the same thing to a dog. You mean because it's just generic? It's not.
Exactly. So if you think about your, average dog and you say, good boy, Fido, if he likes that praise, he likes being told that he's a good boy. If you say the same thing... How
did you know I had a dog called Fido, Drew? I mean, come on, look.
Oh, I know you're into children's storybooks and the like, Kevin. So that's where it came from. Yeah. And so if you said the same thing to me, good job, Drew. Good job last quarter, Drew. I'm happy that you said that to me. It's a good, we call it an attaboy here in the US. It's a nice pat on the back, right? But
what is that a baseball term? Is that a baseball? Is attaboy? I've heard that in American movies.
It's yeah, it probably does have some sort
Yeah, I
of
bet it is. I'll Google that after
derivation.
this call. I'll Google that after this.
Yeah. So it feels good temporarily. It's a nice pat on the back. It's a little dopamine hit, if you will. But what really sticks with you from saying that, or what sticks with the person that you're saying it to? Not much, other than that you approve of the outcome that that person got to. What would mean a lot more is if you, my sales manager, sales leader, said, Drew, the team could really learn a lot from how last quarter you spent a lot of time with your top clients, regardless of their point in the client life cycle, so that when renewal time came, it was an easy decision for them. You landed renewals one after the other, and that really made a big difference to not just your quarter, but to the business's performance. I think the team could learn a lot from how you did that. Now, when I hear that sort of specific praise, and this is, a good part of being a sales leader is delivering that sort of message, right? Some of the difficult part that we'll get to is constructive feedback. But when I hear that sort of specific praise, I know exactly what I did well, and I know why you think that was so important to my success. So that's one example as to how it manifests itself, particularly in the sales world.
What about the other side of it then? I mean, just to be on the negative side, if you have to give someone bad news about performance per se.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it can come from a few different things, from performance or for how you deliver a certain message or how you show up in meetings. And our author, or the author of the book, Kim Scott, has a great story and example that's in the book. If anyone reads it, it'll be told much more eloquently than I'm about to. But she worked for a long time at Google and was part of a really fast growing part of the business. Was doing so well, in fact, that she was brought to the CEO of the company to give an update on how it was doing. And the heads of CEO at that time, incredibly busy people, but also super successful, don't have too much time for, relatively speaking, a single lowly sales manager to give them, updates on numbers. Well, they're there multitasking in their office. One of them's on a treadmill. One of them's barely paying attention. And she starts saying the AdSense business within Google is doing these sorts of numbers. It's up by 300% over the last year. The one on his treadmill almost fell off the treadmill, and the one that was sitting down nearly jumped out of his chair saying, "Excuse me, did you say that correctly? And am I hearing that correctly? What do you need to further increase the success of this business?" And she proceeded to tell them. Seemed like a great conversation. Now, her manager was in the room with her when she delivered this great news to the leaders of Google at the time, and they left the office. And Kim thought, that went super well. My manager has to be very proud of me. Like, what could have possibly gone wrong? And she proceeded to tell her, Kim, I don't know if you noticed, but you say a lot when you're speaking. Do you notice that? And she was like, oh, just sort of brushed it off. Well, I'm sure it's no big deal. That all they care about is the fact that I'm delivering great results for the company. And so in that moment, Kim's manager was attempting to give her constructive feedback, but wasn't quite being direct enough about it. And she sensed that because Kim sort of brushed her off. And she said, let me try this another way. When you say every third word, it makes you sound dumb. And just left it at that. And now you have their attention, right? There's something that is a career limiting behavior that, sure, it went over okay in this moment because you were delivering great news to senior leaders. But if you go on to be a speaker and an author like Kim is, all of a sudden her manager did her a great favor by calling out the fact that she's using these filler words and saying all the time. That's something that's furthered and fueled her success across her career long afterwards. So it's something where if you're willing to be direct and show that you care about the person in doing so, it's not just going to help them right there and then, but for the entirety of their career potentially.
I love that story for a variety of reasons, partly because it resonates with me. When I started doing this podcast, we're now at like episode 78, I think this will go out as, Drew. Maybe it might be 80 actually. I realized that I was using a lot of filler words myself, like and There was a couple of others as well, which is quite annoying. And then when I listened to it more, I started to realize they're actually just pauses for thought. And what you can do is you can just pause. It's okay to do that, right? And also, when I went back, I've now got a little bet with myself. How far can I get through listening to myself before I find one of those words? I've managed to get through a couple of podcasts without saying it at all. But I just recorded one where I actually dropped a filler word in the first sentence. But I think it's interesting and direct feedback that you've got there, isn't it? Because you're being very specific about what the issue might be. And if you people sometimes don't only hear what they want to hear, so they're not really listening to the feedback. They're sort of processing it as a set of feelings, aren't they?
That's right. That's right. Exactly. And, I think important to that point is maybe taking half a step backwards as to why this is named radical candor in the first place. It's radical because it's rare, not because it's extreme or because it's mean or because it's harsh. A lot of people will hear the word or the term radical candor and think, I need to be really direct to the point of being aggressive. And that's not actually true at all. And in the book and in all the tools that we have that support it, we have a nice handy 2x2 matrix, which I know a lot of your listeners will probably appreciate being results focused. And that's the way to solve all the world's problems, right? Through a nice little handy 2x2. But we use the axes, if you will, of challenging directly and caring personally. And so when you care personally and challenge directly, the result is radical candor. When you care personally about someone but aren't challenging them directly, we call that ruinous empathy, meaning you are listening to someone, you are in theory being empathetic to what they're doing or saying, but you're not willing to confront them about what they could do better. And therefore, you're not actually helping them. If you challenge extremely directly without showing that you care personally about someone, that's what we call obnoxious aggression. And that's the stereotype of the command and control manager who is very results orientated, but doesn't necessarily care about the person behind it. And then when you do neither, you don't challenge directly or care personally about someone. That's what we call manipulative insincerity. And that is effectively backstabbing behavior. That's where in the meeting that you might be in, an idea is brought up, everyone kind of agrees in the moment with what someone just said. You leave the meeting, and then you have these side conversations, right, where you're all saying, I don't agree with what Kevin said at all. I don't think that's smart. We shouldn't proceed with that. Now, why doesn't that get brought up in the meeting itself? Or why wouldn't you say that to the person directly? And it's because it's uncomfortable, right? This is something that we as humans by nature don't really want to get involved in that sort of confrontation. But the reality is when you do it, it not only improves your working relationship, but the performance of the company and of your team and of that person specifically.
There's a difference between being kind and being nice.
Yes.
It's
yes.
nice to let your child stay in bed because they're a bit tired and don't want to go to school. But unless they're ill, it's kinder to encourage them. I'm going to use that word. Get out of bed, get your school uniform on, get out the door and go and do it, isn't it?
That's right. That's right. Yeah, exactly. It's showing that you care about someone for the success of whatever their endeavor is, whether that's that child going to school and learning, getting good grades and advancing to the next grade. And when you're in the sales world, your time is too precious to not be told what you can do better. One of our facilitators says this beautifully. The best way for sales leaders to encourage radical candor is to create a marketplace for feedback, build a marketplace for feedback, create a culture where people want it and they want to give it. And in that sense, when everyone has this shared expectation of, right, we're going to be direct enough with one another that we all know where we stand, but we also know that we're doing it out of the kindness of wanting you to succeed or you to do better than you did last quarter, for all of us to succeed because the company is going to do better as a result. So that's really the key to it, is having the shared expectation that everyone is going to do this. Otherwise, you have some people who are willing to jump into this and some people who are naturally going to retreat and not offer it or be willing to receive it. And that's something that ultimately kills culture and performance.
Does it work both ways in the sense that can you provide feedback to your boss?
In fact, you should. And your boss really should want it as well. And so that's where when we work with organizations, we often start with leaders because not because they're the only ones that should be capable of giving and receiving direct feedback, but once they do it, once they walk the walk and demonstrate that this is something that's important, it becomes a lot easier to model it across the team such that everyone else is doing it. And another important part to that, to your question, is we often start with what we call sort of an order of operations, which is you should ask for feedback before you give it. So be willing to receive it before you dish it out. And so we call that soliciting feedback. And we have a set of tools that are actually easily and freely available on our website for how to develop what we call a go-to question or a set of go-to questions. How do you begin that conversation in the first place? By asking for feedback. And then once you do that, it opens up the conversation to go the other way. And then you can advise your team on what you're noticing that they can do better. And in that space, they know that you care because they were willing to hear you out first.
And how often should you provide feedback, Drew?
Yeah, that's something that's changed. I think a lot of companies have started to move this way, and I think rightly so. I think for a long time, the stereotypical way of providing feedback was to wait for the next quarterly or half performance review, something that happens once or twice or maybe 4 times a year if you're lucky. And the reality is it doesn't help anybody to wait that long, because if the first time you're hearing feedback that's direct is during a review, it's going to be surprising, and surprising feedback doesn't actually help you that much if you're waiting that long to give it. And so our advice is that this happens on a continuous basis, not even just during a weekly one-on-one, but really as immediately as possible after something is noticed, after you see a behavior that can be adjusted, or after you see a filler word being used that someone isn't aware of. Back to our example before, note it immediately and note it directly, and ask them to set aside some time to talk about it and say, hey, I'd like to offer some advice or guidance based on what I saw during the ride along when we were with client X earlier this week. Can we chat? And that way the immediacy of it means that the details and that specificity are fresh in both of your minds. If you happen to wait 3 months or 6 months and try to refer back to that same ride along, it's quite possible that neither party is going to remember it very clearly. It's easy to be dismissive of it. And even more importantly, that same behavior may have happened several times since then. And it may have cost you deals, and it may have cost you the quarter that you had in mind.
Can you provide radical feedback or radical candor to a group, or is it just for an individual and who should be taken aside and explain this in private?
Yeah, it's a great question. We often like to say to give constructive feedback in private and to praise in public. So it's really helpful for among your peers if I praise you for the great job that you did. But I don't want to do the same thing if I'm offering constructive feedback to you. So it's better to do that in private, to take someone aside to offer that way. It feels demoralizing if you're criticized in front of your peers. So we really advise managers, leaders, and anyone to not do that. But there is again, an immediacy element to it, to ask for it to happen right now. But then also the praiseworthy elements that can happen during a sales meeting that happens weekly or quarterly. Praising that work in front of your team not only makes you as the person who did that work feel good, but it offers the rest of the team some insight into why did Kevin do so well last quarter. I'd like to learn from what he did well and why he's closing so many deals, or why his renewal rate is so high. So it has a benefit to both sides, especially in the sales world.
What about in your private life?
Yeah, it's funny. We get a lot of people who say, if I started practicing radical candor years ago, I'd still be married. Or we hear a lot of personal stories like that, you know.
Right. Have you?
So
How long have you been with the company for yourself?
I've actually been, it's right about a year as of
Right.
we're speaking right now. Um, and I've been working with Radical Candor in a sort of a partnership capacity for about 4 years before that, as part of my previous role, which was with the Second City, which is a world famous comedy theater, basically created the art form of improvisational comedy.
Oh,
So
wow,
people like
really? You do improv yourself?
I was the least funny person that worked at Second City.
I find that
I'll
hard
tell
to
you
believe. I think you've got a
that.
great sense of humor. I think you've got a. So, does your behaviour change since you discovered radical candor yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think back to your question a moment ago, I find it useful in private life with friends and family members and people who by nature trust you, and that's kind of the foundation to be able to give constructive feedback, right? Like in the working world, that's why we say you need to care personally first about the person before you're able to challenge them directly on things that they need to do better. In our private lives, we have that trust often, if we're lucky enough, of a few close friends or a spouse or family members. And often those are the people that it's most difficult to break difficult news to, right? But we're doing them a favor by doing so. It's just about flipping that mindset to actually do it and get more comfortable with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, great topic. Love
Yeah.
it. Really do. It's unusual, I think, in the way that you're talking about it, because we think it's so natural that we're going to do this, but a lot of the time we're not aware of how we behave, how we come across. We don't think enough about other people's feelings because we're all, as you say, we process the world a lot of the time through feelings. And what we want is to understand how we can improve. Salespeople, as you know, enormously competitive. Most of them just want to get better, and you can't get better if you don't know where you need to improve, and no one's actually told you. In a sense, what you're doing is you're coaching people here, aren't you?
You are. Yeah, that's right. It really is a, hearing out, and what we focus on a lot in our workshops and our talks and other programs is listening empathetically so that you understand more about that person and then are able to give them guidance that matters to them. And that's a big part of coaching, to your point, is understanding the goals and motivation of a given individual so that when you're offering them constructive feedback, it's something that furthers their goals. It's something that means something to them. If their goal is not to, make more money or to advance up the ranks in sales, it might be to have a better work-life balance. It might be knowing more about what they enjoy doing outside of work, so that then you can give them the gift of feedback that helps them get more time back in their day or to do work more efficiently. So the goals of individuals really matter. And that's where, Radical Candor is built around one-to-one communication, and all of those conversations are by nature going to be different, especially when you're working with people in different parts of the world who represent different cultures or might speak different first languages. Your ability to gauge what's important to them and how well your feedback is landing is really important for it to be ultimately successful.
You think Americans are by nature more candid than other nationalities?
It by comparison sometimes, but being an American myself, I feel like we have so much work to do in how we do this well that I wouldn't even say that most of the time we are. I think we might think that we are, but a lot of times people who think that they are naturally radically candid are usually tend to be more obnoxiously aggressive, back to the model in terms that we said before. And that's because they think that just stating something very plainly is radical candor. And that's not necessarily the case. It could come across very aggressive and harsh if you're not delivering it in a way that, means something to the other person, and if you haven't already demonstrated that you care about them as a person. But yeah, to your question, there certainly are cultural differences, and we find that when we work in different parts of the world where, this is the tolerance for candor, it can be quite different.
And where do we get the entry point to understanding this? Is it to buy the book? Would that be a good place to start?
Yeah, the book is a wonderful place to start. We actually recently released a video book version, which is even shorter and easier to consume. radicalcandor.com has a lot of free resources and summaries of our model and the skills therein. We're obviously on LinkedIn, on Twitter at Candor. There's a lot of different programs that are, depending on your budget, quite easily accessible. Or if you represent or lead larger teams and are looking for training to do during a national sales meeting, for example, or an offsite where you're bringing your team together. Anyone who could use the gift of more collaborative communication and feedback to further their success as a team or as individuals can get a lot out of it.
And are they going to get Drew if they book in for one of these on-site training programs?
You'll get someone much more qualified than Drew. I
can't believe that.
Yeah.
You sound like an absolute expert on it. Listen, I know you're a busy guy. I'm going to let you go in a couple of minutes, but I did want to touch on a couple of things in closing. Because I know you're a busy guy, I'm fascinated by how you balance work and life, home and business and all that stuff. What do you do to unwind at the end of a busy day like this, Drew?
Well, your listeners, particularly in the UK, might find this to be an odd way of unwinding, but my side job or hobby is as a football or soccer, as we call it, referee. And so I referee
proper football, we call that, Drew.
Proper football.
Not a game the Americans like you call football, which you actually play 90% with your hands.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
You call it soccer.
Yeah. Association football. That's where it came from. That's right.
The English flavor from the Football Association. Oh boy.
Yeah. So I know from chatting previously, we're both big football fans, and I played growing up, and up until injuries and time caught up with me and moved back into refereeing, which I actually did as an adolescent or as a youth as well. But I find it a helpful way to get out, to exercise, to be close to the game, to help the game grow, to avoid injury as much as possible. And actually, there's quite a few ways where you can practice radical candor. And
I was wondering about that. I was wondering how that would go down. Yeah, you're not presumably refereeing professional football matches, are you?
And not quite, but I do high-level college or university, you would call it.
There's serious kind of people that may end up becoming professional football players, soccer players. How does Radical Candor work with them? Let's hear that. I'm fascinated to know.
Well, I think the coaches and the supporters are a separate question, because they're not going to listen to you. But the players, you never win with them, I'll tell you that. But the players, those who actually do want to develop, they want to get to the next level, they want to, maybe become professionals themselves. They are often quite interested in what referees think of, how they play, or, if a certain action is a foul, or if they should be more aggressive, or why wasn't this a foul? If you're able to be clear and open with them, I would say communication is actually, well over half of the job of a good referee. After the point of being in shape and knowing the rules enough to run around and keep up with these kids, which is harder every day that passes. After that, communication is really the biggest tool in our toolkit, is to both observe what's happening so that you know what's coming before it actually does happen, and be able to be clear about why the decision you made, or why you blew the whistle, or why you didn't blow the whistle afterwards, so that everyone is on the same page, because you're there to help them stay safe and to progress as players. And the more serious it gets, sometimes people lose sight of that, but that's a core part of the job. So I feel like there is some crossover, and it's sometimes stressful, so it's not always the way to unwind in the same way that enjoying a glass of wine or a beer is, but it's fun nonetheless.
Been a great conversation, Drew. Thanks so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. It was a pleasure.
Time flew by. You can always tell when you're having fun, can't you?
Indeed.
I'd also like to thank the listener as well. Please do give us a review if you like what you've heard, because it helps enormously to boost the ratings. And do subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform to make sure you don't miss the next exciting episode.